Personal reflective statements are a key form of evidence when it comes to putting together a portfolio for your SVQ. This is what's going to take up most of your time in the workplace, putting together evidence because it's written. However, it is an excellent form of written evidence because it can show your process, what you've done, and because you're describing what you've done, it really shows your understanding, your comprehension of why you're doing the task as well, not just that you're quite simply doing it. So what is a personal reflective statement? A personal reflective statement is essentially a story of a time where you have completed a task in the workplace. So that's quite important. It is a story of one particular time where you have actually performed that task in the workplace, and it's also task orientated, so it's focused on the task. It's not necessarily focused on a unit, but we'll get into that in a wee bit more detail. So the key thing is thinking about what task do you perform in the workplace. Right, okay, let's start off and write a story about a time where you have completed that. Sometimes it can be helpful to think of it as a guideline, a walkthrough, or a tutorial, because often that's what it looks like when you're reading it back. So if that helps you to kind of get your head around what a personal reflective statement looks like and how it's structured, a lot of time it's as if you're writing if you were reading a walkthrough, how do I do that task? Because it's step-by-step instructions, exactly what you've done. That can be helpful to understand it in those terms. You could maybe think of it as if someone else was joining the business and you had to write a little guide on how to do your job, how to do all the tasks that you're responsible for, because they'll be responsible for them as well because they're doing the same job, then a personal reflective statement would look very similar to that. There are some slight differences though, because this has to be written in the first person in the past tense because it's I have, because you have performed these skills. It's a story of what you've done. It's not a hypothetical, it's something you've actually performed. So that's the only difference between a guideline and a walkthrough. Guideline and walkthrough, you're telling someone else to do it, whereas in this statement you're just reflecting back on a time where you've actually done it. But in terms of the detail, you're going into the step by step exactly what you've done as if it was a walkthrough. Sometimes that can help allow learners who are new to these programs to understand what a statement looks like. And yeah, it could also be seen as a guide on how to complete that task that you're writing your statement on. Personal reflective statements are really a combination of two different types of statements. They are, first of all, a personal statement, and a personal statement focuses on what you have done, so that's the actual actions that you've taken, and it's also a reflective account. So that is you reflecting on why you've done it. How effective was that? Is that the best way to do it? Was there other ways you could do it? What did you learn from it? What did you gain from performing that task? So you're reflecting a bit, and you're discussing not just what you've actually done step by step, well that is very important, but you're also reflecting on what you've learned. So let's have a look at some key tips when it comes to writing a statement. So we'll go through these one by one, and these are key tips on how you would structure a personal reflective statement. Oftentimes when you start on an SVQ, it's quite different compared to other types of education that you may have been to previously, such as school, college or university, where the focus is on knowledge and understanding, and you're learning about theories and you're writing answers to those answers to questions, or you're writing essays, analytical essays. This is different. Vocational qualifications are different, and the emphasis is more so on the performance. It's not on what you know, although there is a bit of that. That's not what the focus is. The focus is on the performance. What have you actually performed in the workplace? So because of that, the structure is going to be different in terms of the way that you actually write it. So first thing is, it's got to be task oriented. It's got to be focused on a particular task that you perform in the workplace. You don't focus too much on the units. The units should be used as a guideline, not as a right, I'm going to do this unit and I'm going to write, look at that criteria, right, this is a wee paragraph on me covering this point, here's another paragraph of me covering the next point. It should be focused on the task that you're actually performing. So think about that time when you start a statement. Certainly you can read the criteria. You can think of a time where you've done that and then forget about the criteria in the unit. Just write about that task, when it was you've done it, and then you can go into the detail. Avoid writing the statement to fit the criteria. Focus on that task, not the criteria unit. Once you've decided that's a task that covers those points, just focus on that task, because you don't want it to be really focused, a narrow thing that just is written to fit that criteria. You want it to reflect authentically what it is you're doing in the workplace, what the task actually is that you're doing. So that's what it means by task orientated. You want to focus on one particular time where you've completed that task. So don't write about a theory, something that's been simulated, or something that's hypothetical. So you don't want to be saying stuff like I would do this, or for example. You want to focus in on a time where you've actually done it. And the best way to start a personal reflective statement is to start with the time. So that could be a specific date, it could be last month, so something a bit more general, or it could be every 2 weeks or every Thursday morning, because it doesn't have to be. Yeah, you want it to be a specific time, but if you do that same task a lot, you repeat the same task, you can include that when you're defining the time and when you do it. It should be written in the STAR method, so that stands for situation, task, action, and result. We'll go into that in a wee bit more detail in a later slide. But the STAR method really structures it well, and it means it's competence based. It's focused on what you actually do. The action part, that is the main component of your statement. This will help you avoid having vague statements, and it will allow you to be very specific, and it includes the detail. A lot of the time, if learners jump straight into writing a statement and just focus solely on the actions that they've taken, when an assessor's reading it, they don't really know what's happening because there's no context to it. There's no what's the reason why you're doing this, what's this system that you're using, how does this fit into the wider business process. It's not very useful at all if it's just a statement on the step by step what you've done. You have to have a wider context to it as well. You also want to have your statements storyboarded with product evidence. Product evidence essentially means screenshots and images. So it shouldn't really look like an essay that's just all written text. It should have a lot of images and screenshots throughout, and it could be helpful to start with the images and screenshots, because if you do the task, say it's a task on a computer, you take the screenshots of each step that you're doing, you put those steps into a Word document, and then you can simply, when it comes to the action section, you can write the actions based on what you're seeing in the image, and sometimes that can be helpful to get the detail. A lot of the time when a learner starts writing personal statements, it can be a bit of a struggle to get the detail that's required in the task, and maybe one of the ways, if that's something that you're affected by, it might help to take the screenshots first, because then you're seeing a picture and you're just describing what you are doing in that picture, and that can make it easier. You don't want to write an unsupported statement, so you should have different forms of assessment methods in the one document, in the one assessment. And for personal reflective statements, the best one to include is this product evidence. So that is images and screenshots. So you're backing up what you're writing with additional evidence that's of a different type. So that would be an image or screenshot to show that you've done that. If it's something that you're doing and it's not on the computer, you can take pictures of maybe the equipment that you're using, or each step that you're doing with a camera, maybe a phone camera, that sort of thing, and then you can include those images into it as well. The one caveat to that is that you shouldn't include any images which are confidential. So you don't want to include any images or screenshots which contain any confidential information, especially personal information, people's contact details, names, phone numbers, that sort of stuff, or financial details, or any sort of stuff that's just confidential for your organisation. If that happens, if you take a screenshot, you can block out certain aspects, and the best way to do that is to use Paint. So if you right click on the screenshot that you've saved, you click open with, and then you select on Paint. You could create a rectangle shape over the information you want to block out, change the fill to solid fill, and pick black or white as a colour. That way, once you save it, that can't be changed and you can't see that confidential information, and it allows you to still use the screenshot. If there's a lot of information on that screenshot that's confidential, then you should be contacting your assessor and doing a discussion around that evidence. So that way you're just talking about it. You have the evidence in front of you, you're talking about it, but we don't use the actual document or the image itself. We just use the recording where you're talking about it in general terms. But all statements should be storyboarded with product evidence. It's not something that's optional. It should have it there, and the only reason why there shouldn't be stuff there is if it's genuinely confidential and you can't use any of it, and that should be something you discuss with your assessor. Personal reflective statements should be written in the first person. So this means that they should be written using the words I or me. Don't use the words we, us, or our. Now, this is something that is very different to when you come from school or college, because when you're in those environments, you're taught to write in the third person. So you're not actually part of the conversation of what you're writing about. You're a sort of third party and you're writing it in general terms. Whereas with this statement, because it's a story of a time where you've actually performed this task, you're wanting to be writing about what I have done. So don't say you would, or we would, or this is what us, or that sort of stuff. You want it to be I have. So use the word I, make sure there's a lot of I's in it. The word we, so sometimes that is important. So if you're writing about a task that you're doing, and as part of that task, your team is responsible for doing certain aspects of it, that's fine to say, our team does X, Y, or Z. But as soon as you say that, you must say explicitly what it is that you contribute towards that. So my team is responsible for processing invoices on the finance system. I contribute to this by, and then saying what you do as part of that. Because this is a portfolio of evidence about what you do. It's not about your team, so the emphasis should really be on you. The only reason to include what other people do is to provide additional context. So you sort of need to explain sometimes what other people do so that what you're doing makes sense. In which case you would want to refer to what other people do, but that's the only reason for doing that. It's not really about what your team's doing, it's about what you're doing, it's your evidence, it's about what you perform, not all that interested in what your team's doing. A personal reflective statement should also be written in the past tense. So that means it's something you've already done. It's not something you're going to do in the future, it's something you've actually done already. So that's why it's always should be done in the past tense. And to do that, avoid using words such as I would. Avoid using words such as if. The only exception to using if is if it's right at the end where you're reflecting, and you can do that only at the end of a statement, not in the middle. Certainly not in the action part. And I'd avoid using for example. Now sometimes for example works, but it sort of screams hypothetical a little bit, so generally speaking I'd avoid using for example, so it's very, very clear that this is something that you've already done using the language. And again, that is something that takes a little bit of getting used to, because it's very different to how you might have answered a question at school or how you might have written an essay when you're encouraged to write in the third person. The statement should be holistic. So holistic means that it is really task orientated, and it basically it falls into a number of different units. And the way that it will fall into a number of different units is that it's focused on a task that you actually perform. When you perform tasks in the workplace, they're not going to fit into just the one unit. You're going to be doing a task, and let's say you're managing your time as part of that. You are dealing with customers and you're communicating. You are using a piece of computer software, and you also have to print and scan. If you're writing about that task, you'll find that task will fit into units about customer service, managing your time, using that computer software, and using office equipment as well if you're doing that unit. So it'll fall naturally. Doing that one task will fall naturally into a number of different units, and that's what it means by being holistic, because it's focused on a task. You should include knowledge and link to your performance. So when you're writing your statements, you'll see that in the unit guides there is a split into two, and one is performance criteria, one's knowledge and understanding. Now, it's important for vocational awards that your knowledge and understanding is assessed in the context of your work. So this is again different to what you might have done at school or college, depending on your background, in that it's not, we don't want to know about what other businesses could be doing, what other organisations could be doing, what are the options. We want to know what is your organisation doing, and if it's a knowledge point where you're sort of comparing it and you're saying it's not something my organisation currently does, but something we could do, then it's important that you really relate it to what your organisation does and what's relevant to your role. It's not just a sort of generic, this is something I found on the internet that could apply. It's got to be linked to what you're doing. So the best way to do this is to link your knowledge into your personal statements. So if I give a little example of how this might apply to see if this might explain it a bit better. Let's say the performance point is comply with your organizational requirements for data protection. Okay, and there's a knowledge point which is describe your organization's requirements for data security or data protection. So one is about complying with it, one's about describing it. Compliance, performance, describing is knowledge and understanding. Part of your statement, to cover that point, you'd have to explain what it is that you do to comply with information security. So maybe someone phones up asking for information, you'd be asking them some security questions to make sure they're the right person. You would be ensuring that you're saving files in the right place, that there's passwords on it, you're keeping your password secure, you're updating your password, that sort of stuff. But that's what you're actually doing, and that's what you're actually performing. To link knowledge into that performance, you'd maybe describe what organizational procedures are first. So maybe you'd first like my organizational procedures around information security and data protection is, and you say what your procedures and your policies are and where you found them, and then you start talking about what it is you've done. So you're starting to join it all together in the one document. You don't really want to have it on separate documents. You want to try and link it together, and that's better for you as well as a learner, because it means you don't have to write as much. Because if you had it in two separate documents, if you had knowledge and understanding separately, then you'd have to write more, essentially, because you have to explain the context again. Whereas you've already explained the context as part of your statement. So keep knowledge and performance together where possible. It's not going to be the case that you're going to cover all of the knowledge points in a personal statement. The gaps can be filled just sort of by question and answer, but we want to get as much as possible holistically out of including it in a personal statement. And the last point here is reflect on why you did what you did and evaluate what you've learned or what the impact your work has. So don't simply list the actions that you've taken. So that's a bit on the STAR method, and that's simply saying don't forget about the reflection on the end. Don't forget about the result or the reflection part. When you get to the end, at that point you can start talking about hypotheticals, what ifs, what you learned, what you did well, what you could have done better in the future. You don't want it just to be this is exactly what I've done and then achieve the task at the end. You want to have a bit of reflection on the end of these statements, and that really is really useful for showing that you understand what it is you're doing. It's not just all you can do is do the process and that's it, you don't think about it. It shows you really comprehend and understand what it is you're doing, and that you can apply in different contexts. You would do different activities or do it a different way perhaps. STAR method, right. So the STAR method is the essential way of structuring a personal reflective statement, and it can be very, very helpful, particularly at the start, if it's one of your first statements that you're doing, to try and rigidly stick to this as much as possible. And once you do it a couple of times, you really get used to it and become a lot easier. But it is the best way for structuring a personal reflective statement to ensure that you cover all these main key tips that I've outlined. So the first one, situation, that's what the S stands for, situation. You want to explain the context and situation behind the task that you're going to do. The very first thing you should write about, you should always write about in this first sentence of a personal statement is time. So start with time. When is it you've done this thing? Because straight away that outlines it's something you've actually done and you've done it in the past. You then want to explain what the task is that you're doing and why it is you're doing that. If there's any jargon, any systems, any processes that someone outside your organisation doesn't know, might not understand, then explain that in the situation part. So for example, it could be I add a customer order to SAP. SAP is a CRM system which manages all the communications with our customers and the orders which they place. So just saying I process orders on SAP doesn't mean anything. Explain what SAP is and what it's used for. It's a database system for keeping records on customers essentially. You also at this point maybe want to explain why it is you're doing it, who you're doing it for, that sort of stuff at the start. So it's just about the context of what it is you're doing. The next bit is task. So that's you getting into more detail about the task that you're doing. You're outlining how it is you're supposed to do it. You're outlining the processes. You're outlining what other people do as part of it perhaps. It's just a bit of background on that specific task. The situation is more sort of broader. Task, you're starting to get a wee bit more focused, but you're still talking really about the context, but it's the context specific to the task. So what is the task you need to be doing? When does it need to be done? What standard does it need to be done by? How are you going to plan your time? Do you need to communicate with anyone at this point before you start doing the task? How do you know you have to do the task? Do you have to get a notification? Do you get an email? Do you have to check a system? Is it just something you do at a certain time every week? So background on the task. The largest part of a personal fitness statement is the action section, and that is step-by-step instructions as if you're writing a guide for someone. This is the bit that looks like a walkthrough. It is step by step exactly what you've done in a lot of detail. You'll start off with, for example, you're logging into the computer system, you're opening up Sage accountancy software, you're logging in, you've got the invoice next to you, you've got an invoice and an email, you open it up in a PDF format, you copy the customer ID, you click on the search customer function. It is a lot of detail you get into, and that's the bit where the screenshots come into play, where your screenshots are illustrating all these steps that you're doing. Should contain lots of verbs, so verbs are action words, so it's really explaining the action that you're doing, and this is particular attention should be put here to doing first person singular pronouns as well. And the last section is the result or reflection. So what is the outcome? What did you achieve? Did you complete it on time? Did you complete it to the right standard? Did you have to go back and change anything? Did you get feedback on what you've done? Was the way you did it that time, was that the best way you could do it, or did you learn an improvement? Could you have done it differently? What about different contexts or situations? If something else had happened, would you have done it a different way? Would you have used a different tool? So a bit about the result and a bit of reflection on what you've done. That's the STAR method. Holistic statements. So we're just going to talk a little bit about holistic statements. So by focusing on the task, it's possible to cover multiple criteria. This will make statements authentic and holistic. Okay, so authentic means it is authentically what you do in your job. You're putting together a portfolio of evidence that proves how good you are at your job. So when you look at that, it should be basically a big folder. If it's printed, most of the time it is digital. But if you print it, it should just be a big folder of tasks that you've done and evidence of all the tasks and things you've performed as part of your job. It should be holistic in that the tasks you're doing should go into different units. It shouldn't just be a one unit at a time, one bit of evidence for each unit sort of thing, one statement on a whole unit, one statement on a whole unit. It should be based on the tasks that you're actually performing. And it should be the whole task, not just part of one. And this is why it's important when you start writing a statement to forget about the unit, because if you're focused on the unit too much, you end up making it a really narrow statement. And if you make it a really narrow statement, it's not going to fall into other units. As a learner starting on an SVQ program or a vocational program, you will use a unit guide as guidelines to start with. So you'll focus a statement on a unit. And this is a discussion with your assessor, because they will ask you, what have you been doing in the workplace since the last review? What new tasks are you doing? Right, okay, I want you to write a statement on that task, and I want it to fall into these are sort of criteria to look at across these different units. But you should only really use that as a guideline. You want to be making sure you're covering that, but you want to be trying to write about what you're actually doing, because your assessor knows the units inside out, and they'll be able to map in that evidence into units that you're not even thinking about yet because you've not looked at it. Particularly when you start, you're not going to know all the criteria inside out, and you're not expected to, so don't get too worried about that. If you write your statements authentically, what it is you do as a task, and you write about the whole task, then it will be useful for other units that you're doing, and your assessor can then, because they understand the criteria and all the units that you're doing, can easily map that in. That's not something you necessarily need to worry about, but the important thing for you is that you're writing about the whole task, not just the one part, because if you write about the one part that's relevant to the unit you're looking at, it's never going to fall into these other units, and ultimately, over the long run of your SVQ, your vocational qualification, you're going to have to produce more work. If you do it holistically, when you come to do your last units, you'll find there's a lot of evidence already in there, and it's just a case of filling in the gaps. So yeah, focus on the task, not the criteria unit. Use the unit simply as a guideline, because you don't want to go too far the other way. If you just write about a statement and you don't look at any units, then you might go off on a tangent. So you do want to make sure you're covering a unit to some extent, but the best way to do that is first of all read the unit, make wee bullet points on tasks that you do that would cover those points. You'll find that a number of tasks will start to, you'll be writing the same task on a number of different criteria. Just forget about the criteria at that point, write the statement about that task, and then at the end you can read through it and you can sort of see where that task covers those points. So we've already mentioned about using the unit guide as a guideline because you don't want to go too far the other way. Performance versus knowledge and understanding. So this is important to get to grips with as well. So this is something that confuses a lot of learners when they start to look at unit guides. What's the difference between performance and knowledge and understanding? So key thing is to read the criteria carefully and understand what it's asking you. So let's use this as an example. The criteria is comply with the organisational and legal requirements relating to information management processes and responsibilities. So that's essentially data protection. Now the key word in here is comply. It's asking you how you comply with the organisational requirements in your workplace. It's not asking what they are. Now it might be useful to include what they are to start with, and then you can explain how you comply with them. But the key thing is on the performance. It's not necessarily on your knowledge and understanding, so you know what they are. The main thing here is you actually comply with them. You could know what they are, but that's not really important. It's more useful to know that you can actually comply with them in the workplace. You've practically applied that knowledge in the workplace, and that's the difference between knowledge and understanding. Knowledge and understanding is simply you know what the procedure is, you know what the best equipment to use is. Performance is that you can actually then apply that knowledge in the workplace to a task that you're doing, and that's the difference, and that's what's a lot more useful to a vocational qualification. Focus is always with vocational words on performance. It's not on the knowledge. Knowledge is a part of it, but the emphasis, unlike this is the difference from school or college, the emphasis is on performance. What can you actually do? So we're going to look at some example statements now to illustrate the points that I've made in terms of the structure, what to include and how to present it, and hopefully seeing a statement that's been put together will make it a little bit easier for you when you come to do yours. So we'll start off firstly with an example of a poor statement, a statement that hasn't really been put together particularly well. So we can see it here. This personal statement is one that I've simply created just to illustrate these points. So this isn't a good example. The main thing that's wrong with this is that it is focused on a unit. This person has simply copied and pasted the criteria from the unit, and I should probably say the unit that this is on is PowerPoint Software 3. So this is a unit which is on putting together a PowerPoint just to illustrate the concepts that we're talking about. And this person has simply pasted in the criteria, and then they've put a wee paragraph below it to explain that they have covered that point. Okay, so it's not the best way to do it because it's focused on the unit, and because of that, if you read it, it's all a bit jumbled up. You don't really know what they're doing. There's not a lot of context, and if you read the language that's been used here, it's a lot of if I had to produce a PowerPoint. So that's they've not really. This person hasn't done it. So how can they be signed off as being competent at producing PowerPoint presentations if they're saying if I had to at the start? You have to have actually have done it. You've got to have done it a couple of times before we can say, well, you're competent at doing that. You know how to do it. So yeah, I would, again, hypothetical. It's too short. That's not useful at all. There's no information. There's not enough there to make a judgment as to whether that person can cover that point. And there's also no product evidence. There's no screenshots. It's just the one type of evidence. It's just a personal statement. Yeah, no screenshots. It's not enough detail. This one here as well. So there is a bit of context at the start here, and there is more detail in this one, but it's not written in the correct structure, which doesn't make it, which just makes it not useful. So if we compare that to, and again, if you want to read this in more detail, feel free to pause the recording and have a look at it. I'll scroll down to this one if you want to do it as well to read this one, so you can compare. And there's 1.4, 1.5. So again, very short, not a lot of detail, and it's all jumbled up. You know, they're just covering that point, but they might not have done it in that order when they were doing the task. So if we look at the acceptable, so this is a bit better. It's still going, still focused on the unit, it's still criteria statement, which means it's not particularly holistic. It's very difficult to then take this and map it into different units because it's so focused on the criteria. You're basically just answering it as if it's a question. We'll read through this one and explain how it's better. So first of all, there is more information here, so at least more detail, so there's a chance that we can actually say that this person, there's enough here to say that this person's competent at that point. They've also included product evidence, so they've got the product evidence here and they've illustrated it with screenshots, which is much better. They've started with time, so on the 2nd of April I had to produce a PowerPoint presentation which one of my colleagues, Steve Rogers, had asked me to complete. This presentation was on the new customer service qualification which my organisation is going to deliver. This presentation is to be delivered to the first cohort of new learners in the programme. Steve has asked that I include information from the Modern Apprenticeship Framework to give background on this qualification. To produce my PowerPoint presentation, I searched on Google to find information on the qualification framework. I then summarised key points from this document on a new slide on my presentation. This covers the points which Steve has requested. I also include a table which I copied and pasted from the framework document. This is something which Steve has also requested in my presentation. So it's good. They've got time, so something they've actually done. They've got a bit of context. We know sort of what they're doing, and they've said where they got information and how they pasted it in, and then they've got a screenshot of them doing it. So that is far better than the last one, which is just like a couple, like 2 or 3 sentences on. I put some information in a PowerPoint. We now know what PowerPoint they've done it. We know when they've done it. We've got a screenshot backing it up. We know where they've found information. So that is much stronger evidence. This is acceptable because if someone sent me a statement like this for this point, I would accept it and say, yep, okay, this statement here shows they're competent at that point. It's not the best way to do it. There is a better way to do it, and I'll show you that in a second. But certainly this does show that that person is competent at that point. If we look now to the next one, insert tables and charts and link to source data. So saying here, for my customer service award presentation, I had to insert a table. The table I had to insert was the qualification framework. This document lists the code, name, SCQF level and credit value of all the units that can be selected for this award. To insert the table into the presentation, I found the Word document which contained the table. I then selected all the tables so it was highlighted. I then selected copy. I opened up my presentation, created a new slide, and I then selected the paste option which included source formatting. The table then appeared. I then clicked Ctrl plus A and this highlighted the table, select a different font size and colour so the table matched the design of my presentation. The table was also too long to fit on one slide. To solve this, I selected on the remaining rows, copied them and created a new slide and then pasted them in. So split the table across 2 slides. I then moved and resized the table, its layout and design. I then went back to the previous slide and deleted the rows which I'd copied onto the next slide. This allowed me to insert the table into my PowerPoint presentation. The table is an easy way to display information on all the units, their groups, for each unit code, SCQF level, credit value, and it makes it easier for the audience to understand this information. So that is a lot of detail there of exactly what they did, and you can start to see how much detail we're looking for, and it's actually the buttons that they're pressing and selecting. They've not had time here, but they are sort of referring back to what they've been talking about up here, so that does give it a bit more context. A lot of data about what they're actually doing, and then there's reflection on the end, which is excellent. And again, it's supported by a screenshot of that table being pasted into the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so again, it's not the best way to do it because it's not holistic. The only point you can really cover off is this one criteria in the unit. So it's not holistic. It is task oriented. It's focused on a task that they're doing. But the problem is with this, it's acceptable because it's more detail, but it's still all jumbled up. We've got this as well, and again you can pause and have a wee read through that if you want to, so we can compare it to the acceptable one. Again, another screenshot on that. Organising, combining information. So this person's saying that they've got information that they found online, summarising it, and they're putting it into their presentation. And this is about saving it appropriately, and they've got a screenshot of how they're saving it. Okay, so that is acceptable because each paragraph shows they're competent at that one particular point, but it's not best practice. So if this was submitted in this way, if you find this other way that I'm going to show you a wee bit too much to grasp, then certainly this is a bit of a simpler way of doing it, and it is acceptable. So I move now to look at the best case example of how to structure, how to lay out, and how to put together a personal statement. This would be it. Okay, so the first thing you'll notice is that there is a title. So this person has given this a title, and the title's based on the task that they're doing. So their title is producing a presentation on the customer service award. And I'll start to read through it and point out the things that they're doing well here. So they're starting off with, on the 5th of March, I was asked by the Programme Delivery Manager, Steve Rogers, to produce a presentation on the Customer Service Award, which is accredited by the Scottish Qualifications Authority, SQA. This is one of my key responsibilities to support the sales teams in addition to processing invoices and booking customers onto classroom training. Okay. So, started with time. They're explaining the context of what they had to do, explaining that sort of information, what it's on, and they're explaining that's part of their key responsibilities. Now, you'll see there's a wee citation there in brackets, so it's bracket FE1V04 space K1. So that is a way of mapping your evidence or signposting what points you've covered off. I would recommend, particularly to start with, not to get too focused on that. Main thing is I'd always write the statement first and then read through it again. Don't try and cite as you write because it starts to get very confusing. Just write your statement and then you can go back and read through it to see what points it covers. And don't worry about covering. Don't worry about looking at all your units. Focus on the units you're looking at, that you're focusing on, because your assessor can quite easily go through this and map it into additional units that you've covered. But this is just to give you an idea of how this is a better way of signposting because there's less emphasis on the unit. You can see here that that's a lot smaller, doesn't distract you because the focus is on the task, what that person's actually doing. Okay, and down the bottom of this document, they've then listed all the criteria they've done. So it's a very similar idea. They've basically combined it all into one big statement. And unlike before, where they were simply writing the statement in between each point, this statement as a whole covers all these points. So they've got it in just down the bottom from the unit guides, and then within the text, just to signpost in what part, because it is a big statement, they're just putting in brackets the unit code and the point they've covered. And the best thing to do is to leave that till the end. Write your statement first, and then read over it again, and then just start putting in brackets the points you've covered. And as you do it, paste the whole criteria down the bottom. So we go back up to the top, we go through this. So received an email from my manager, Steve Rogers, outlining what I had to do. Screenshot. Okay, so backing up, that is true. That person did get that email, and the email saying, "Want you to produce this presentation, and this is what should be in it." Okay. I had to complete my task by the 5th of April. As it was month end, I had to prioritise processing invoices and uploading sales documents to the customer relationship management software CRM system. This must be completed by the last calendar day of the month, so the value can count to the sales team members' individual targets. I looked at my calendar and I made an appointment on the April 2nd to complete the task. Okay, and again, they are citing or signposting three different units, three different criteria there from one unit. So this statement is focused on the PowerPoint software 3, but you can see already they're starting to cover off other units. This S301 is about planning and managing your time effectively. And that's something that they did at the start and they've included in their statement. And then so this statement is not only falling into the presentation unit, but it's starting to fall into that S301 unit about managing time. I would estimate, based on prior experience, producing presentations, that this task would take me 4 hours. Completing the task on 2nd of April allows me to prioritise uploading documents before March 31st. I also have 3 days before the deadline as contingency. And that is then getting mapped into FE1V04, which is a customer service unit. So this person's also doing a customer service unit, and they've covered two points there, point 4 and point 10. If we scroll down to the bottom, we can see what that is. FE1V. So it's make realistic customer service promises and check that service you have given meets customers' needs and expectations. So they're confirming with customers, they're planning out their time, and they're ensuring that the dates that they've agreed to are accurate and they can actually perform that task to a good standard within that time. Uploading the sales documents. Uploading the sales documents is more urgent because the deadline is sooner. This paperwork directly affects the income of my organisation and therefore is of a very high importance. While the presentation is important, it's not as urgent as the deadline is later than for uploading sales documents. I regularly make appointments in my calendar to manage my time. This allows me to block off time to focus on key tasks. Doing this also ensures that I can meet Steve's expectations when he will receive the presentation and the standard that it will meet. This also ensures I have enough time to complete other tasks expected of me. And they're covering off 2 points in SDO1, but it's knowledge points this time. It's not performance. So you can see there, this person's then explaining why he's doing that. This is why I'm putting some time into my calendar, and that shows he's aware of that process. He understands how to actually manage his time and the processes for doing so, and that's what those points relate to there. And it's a screenshot product evidence of that time in his calendar to perform that task. So it's backing up. He has definitely done it because there's a screenshot showing he's put that appointment. He's not just writing about it. There's evidence that he's done it that backs up what he's saying. I called Steve on the phone to get more information on the presentation he was looking for me to produce. This allowed me to have a clear understanding of the requirements for this task. I have completed similar presentations for other qualifications. Steve confirmed he would like it to be similar in design and information to those previous presentations I have produced. Previous presentations contained an intro, an end slide, a slide which had information about the programme summarised from the Modern Apprenticeship Training document, a video linked from YouTube about future jobs, followed by a few slides with the framework table. A lot of stuff there about customer service because he's talking about contacting Steve. So he got the email, but he wasn't 100% sure what Steve's expectations were. So he gave him a phone call. He confirmed what they are. So that covers these points. These are customer service units that he's covering here, and the point about knowing what he's putting together in the PowerPoint unit. I have to be careful about the content in the presentation so I don't infringe on copyright. However, my employer has an agreement with the organisation to deliver this award. I'm using this content for educational purposes and it's allowed under fair use. To be safe, I have referenced the sources of the information by adding a caption in my presentation. Then you cite the point from the PowerPoint presentation software 3 that is about the effects that copyright have, or copyright rules and regulations have on using certain images and videos and copyrighted material in his presentation. So he's explaining the knowledge, he knows why, and you can see that's another good example of how knowledge can be embedded into a performance statement. I made this call within 30 minutes of receiving the email. The call was polite and friendly as I work with Steve regularly, we know each other well. I responded by phone as this conversation is the best way to understand Steve's needs regarding the presentation, and I then followed up the phone call with an email summarising the points discussed during the call. The follow-up email ensures that there's a written record to confirm the work required. S308 is a unit, it's about communicating in a business environment, and he's covering the points that he's selected the best method of communication, he's justified it, that sort of thing. So that's then fallen into an additional unit, which is communication. So you'll start to see now that this unit, this statement is holistic because it's focused on the task. It's not so much focused on the criteria, but by focusing on the task, and we'll explain first of all the context, planning time, communicating. It's fallen into all these different units. I think there's about good 4 or 5 units that has been covered, or at least partly covered, by this statement. The purpose of my email is to confirm what his expectations were in terms of the quality and the standard the presentation had to meet. This is in line with my organisation's procedures for responding to requests for work. I should respond within 24 hours by phone or email requests for work to confirm expectations depending on how detailed the request is and what work is required. Depending on how detailed the request and what's required, that would determine if I should respond by phone call or email. If the work is routine, I would respond by email. If it's complex, not unclear or not routine, I would follow up with a phone call. So again, customer service about knowing the best way to follow up. Screenshot of the email where he has then followed up that phone call confirming to Steve this is what you're looking for, and then there's a written record of that, and he's explained that's why he's doing that. On the 2nd of April, I produced the PowerPoint presentation. Firstly, I opened Microsoft PowerPoint by selecting on the Start menu, so then selected New, then Blank Presentation. Screenshot of it. Screenshot of the new presentation. Created the title slide Customer Service. Had to insert 2 slides, which are about the qualification. To do this, I searched Customer Service MA Framework and selected on the link to Skills Development Scotland's website, selected on the framework document and downloaded a PDF. Screenshots of finding that information, downloading it and summarising the information. Open the PDF and summarise the relevant information, and then covering points in this presentation software 3 unit. Again, screenshots and an explanation of what they've done, so it's storyboarded. Then had to insert a video into the presentation as requested in my brief. To do this, I went to youtube.com, I searched for Skills Development Scotland's channel, I selected on the videos and sorted by most popular. I then selected on the most appropriate video. To select this into my presentation, I copied the web address. I then went back to my PowerPoint and selected Insert Video, Online Video. I then pasted the web address into the box and a preview of the video then appeared. I selected Insert. I then moved and resized the video in the middle of the screen and I mapped or signposted criteria that's about inserting videos into the presentation. I made the video as large as possible without covering the slide title, and then a screenshot of them doing that, inserting the video. So three screenshots there of the steps involved in putting a video into the presentation. I then had to insert the course framework into the presentation to this. I created 2 more slides, put framework as a title as the first, unit guide on the second, found the framework online as a PDF, downloaded it, opened it, and then using the snipping tool took a screenshot, which created an image, saved it in the downloads folder, went back to PowerPoint, selected insert image downloads, and select on that screenshot name to insert it. Moved and resized the image to fit the slide, and then searched online for the mandatory unit by typing the unit code into Google, following the same steps to download, screenshot, and insert into the framework. I inserted an image of the unit guide. I then made the end slide and selected the section heading as a slide layout. So, talking all about how they're actually step by step inserting images now. I had to format and design the slide, so I don't feel like I need to read out all of this now because you're starting to get the idea. But you can see here how this compares to the previous statement where it was just acceptable, where it was a criteria in the statement, and this makes more sense because you've explained the context at the start, talking about how you're managing time, communicating, confirming what it is you need to do. That's going into for this one, it's mandatory units, and then you're going step by step what you're doing, and it's all done in the right order. This is done in the right order, that the order that this person actually performed this task, not the order that the unit guide outlines it, because they don't always align, and it starts to not make sense that when you compare it to the other one. If you rewind the video and look at what we were what was there, you'll see it's sort of jumbled up. And reading this just makes more sense, forgetting about apprenticeships and what type of evidence this is and all the rest of it. Just reading a document that looks like this just makes more sense because it's a story. It's this task from start to finish in the order that person done it in. When you do it according to unit guide, it starts to feel jumbled. It doesn't feel as authentic when you're reading it. So start to scroll through this, but you get the idea. This is about formatting the text. And then we're talking about saving now. So this person's then going into detail about how they saved it. They saved it on a shared drive. A shared drive is a collaborative technology software that allows you to work with other people as if you're working with them in the same place. So that also covers the point in this unit here, which is using collaborative technology. So that's an additional unit that they're covering because they're talking about how they saved it in the collaborative technology. So it's a shared drive, then shared it that way. Then received an email back from Steve saying that there isn't any transitions, which was requested. Person who is writing this statement then took ownership of that mistake, went back, opened it up, added transitions in, screenshot of them adding in transitions, saved it again in the same place, sent an email back to confirm that the change has been made, and then on the end they're reflecting on that mistake as well. So the end, the reflection part is, this task was a complicated task which I am asked to complete on a regular basis. When completing this task, it's very important that I manage my time appropriately and I have excellent communication with the internal customer. This ensures that they have confidence in my ability to complete the task to the right standard and deadline. Communicating, prioritising and managing my workload allows me to successfully complete the task by the deadline 5th of April and to standard agreed with Steve. The presentation is key to communicate information about the programmes, and this is one of my key responsibilities to ensure that these are put together in a consistent way, following my organisation's house style and branding. My ability to produce presentations has allowed this to be achieved. I made a mistake by missing out the transitions, however I quickly owned up to my mistake and came up with a solution. Taking ownership of the mistake in this way demonstrates that I can learn from my mistakes. And that point there is about taking ownership for mistakes. Steve was impressed by this and provided positive feedback to my manager about my performance on this task. So that's what the reflection looks like. They're summarising what they've done, they're reflecting on what they did well, what they didn't do well, how often they do it, just their sort of reflection, their understanding on it, and they even managed to cover another point in the reflection part. So that is the structure of a statement, of a holistic and authentic statement. It's authentic because it's what that person done as a task. you can see there that they didn't just focus on that unit guide. They got that presentation software. They thought, when have I put together a presentation? Oh yeah, I did it for that customer service word. Right, let's forget about that unit now. Let me think, what did I do? How did that start? Oh yeah, Steve emailed me, asked me to do it, give him a phone call, and he's taking it from there and writing a full holistic statement on that task. And because of that, you can see the number of units that they have, the number of points they've covered. So this F9CV, that's the PowerPoint unit. So they've covered that unit in whole, but they've also covered collaborative technology 2, so that's 2 units, 3 units, 4 units, these are customer service units, 5, 6, so that's 6 units that this one statement has fallen into, whereas that acceptable, if we just jump back to the acceptable one, that only covers um, the PowerPoint software fully. It doesn't go into any other units because it's really focused. It only answers that point that's been asked as if it's a question, whereas this other statement, and that's the key difference between the two. This this one here is focused on the task, and because of that, it starts to fall into units. This person, when they wrote this, they wouldn't have been thinking about all other units. They've been thinking mostly about the PowerPoint software unit. But the assessor can then look at that and say, actually, no, this fits into all these different units. These are the points it fits into, and it means it really it saves them work, because when they come to do these mandatory units, these S301, S308 units, all that evidence is going to be there already. So when you come to do your last units, it starts to become a case of just filling the gaps rather than completing the unit as a whole. Okay. The best way to signpost the criteria covered is, first of all, like I said, just write the statement first, then paste the criteria you've covered down the bottom under a heading. Doesn't really matter too much what the heading is. This one I've called assessment criteria. Um, Paste it in, and then you can go through the statement and just put in wee brackets the point that you've covered as you cover it. And if you don't cover everything, don't worry, your assessor again can support you with that, but it just lets you engage with the units when you do it yourself that way. And on here there's assessor comments. So this is something, this is feedback that the assessor's given, and they've put it within the statement at the bottom of it, and it's giving feedback to the learner on the statement. So it's saying it's great, stuck to STAR method, step-by-step instructions, covered both performance and knowledge in the one statement. It's very holistic, authentic, covers the unit you're focused on and falls into all these different units. So great work, and that's something the assessor will add in as well. So you've also got some feedback that's documented in the personal reflective statement. So hopefully this helps when it comes to structuring a personal reflective statement. A lot of time I think it can help just seeing a fully fledged example. This is quite a detailed example, so it's not the case that all your personal statements are going to be necessarily as long as this and cover as many units as this, but the key thing is it is a task which you've performed and you're focused on a task that you genuinely perform in the workplace rather than focusing it in on the units. You're only using the units as a guideline. So hopefully that helps you.